Hi everybody, today we're going to go over how to use the cameras in After Effects. So one thing you'll want to do is go to the website where you're going to see in artsandjustice.org, go ahead and click on Digital Arts and go ahead and scroll down a bit until you find the After Effects cameras link. And here you're going to see I've given you some examples of what it's going to look like today. So we're going to be doing changes in focus, and this will all make a lot more sense once we start experimenting. But if you need to see some examples, you'll see them here. So we'll talk about link focus, and you can have some fun with this stuff. But if you want to follow along with my lesson today, I've given you a link here for camera project images. This is right here. It says this is a zip file, download it, and then double click it. So you're going to click on that file. It's going to save a zip file to your computer. And in your downloads, you're going to find a zip file. You're going to double click that. And inside of there, there's going to be three pictures of a house, a cloud, and a dog. And we are going to use those so that we can experiment with cameras. So go ahead and again, go to Digital Arts, go to After Effects Cameras, click on this icon here, and that way you can download the zip file with the images. You don't have to use these images for this to work. You could do your own thing. You could just create shapes, but this will be easy to follow along with. The notes are here in the blog. I have given you right here under Focus Basics. So we're going to do all these Focus Basics, two-node camera, Null Control, Auto Orient. And with this, you'll have some fun. Yeah, so let's talk about what the camera does, and let's just basically go through these notes here. So what we want to do, everybody, is we want to obviously go into After Effects. I'm going to actually keep my notes open here on the side of my screen. That way I can follow along, and that way you can follow along and make sure that you just do them in order with me. One of the things about working with this camera function inside of After Effects is that it can make your computer run a little bit slow. So we're going to make our composition a little bit smaller. So we're in After Effects, and now we're going to create a new composition. Now usually we were making compositions that were pretty big for our sizes. If you remember in our class, we were going to HD TV 1080 at 24, which is very cool, but this is a big size. And since this can sometimes make your computer run a little slow, we're going to actually make it a lot smaller this time. We're going to go to HD TV 720 25. That's going to make the screen 1280 by 720, which is a lot smaller, which is good because it's going to look great. It's just going to run faster. It's just not as big. It's not as HD. And frame rate, we can lower that to 24. And in terms of duration, let's put that at 2 seconds. So again, 1280 by 720. We're making it smaller because we want it to run faster. Composition, you can call this Focus Basics. So we're going to make a couple experiments, okay? Duration at 2. Press OK. So what I'm going to do first is use those images that I gave you in the blog. This was the zip file right here, so make sure you click on that and download those images. Once you download those images, you should be able to go into your computer and import the file, which in my case is in my downloads in Camera Project. And there's three pictures: the picture of clouds, a dog, and a house. So let's do the first thing that we're gonna just put those into our scene here, and let's name them. So I'm gonna drag the clouds, and I'm just gonna add a little bit something to the front of this name. I'm gonna add background, okay, because we're gonna make a three layer stack. Then we're gonna put the house, middle ground, and then the dog. And now that we have those three there, what we're going to do is we're also now going to create a camera, okay? So how do we create a camera? Well, you can either go up to the top and go to make a new layer in here that's going to be a camera. So layer, new, camera, or you can right click in the empty space at the bottom, new camera. Either one. Now when you go to the camera settings for the first time, you get to change this stuff around. So just let's follow along, and I get it, it's all here in my notes if you want to follow along. For the type, I'm going to choose one node camera. I'm going to change the preset to 50 millimeter. These presets, everybody, they relate to actual physical cameras. This is all based off of cameras. So for those of you who study cinematography or who know how to use a camera, there is an actual realistic relationship to this. So again, I'm just going to kind of simplify it for us, which is one node camera, 50 millimeter. In the bottom here, let's make the units set to pixels because I'm going to be thinking about pixels as I create my project. Let's click on Enable Depth of Field, Lock to Zoom. Let's check both of those on. And let's then change the zoom to 500. This means that the camera is now going to be set to the distance from the camera to our area of what's important is 500 pixels. And this will make more sense once we look at it. So again, one node camera. Preset, I originally was at 50. Once I modified this stuff, it changed. But I started at 50. Pixels. Enable depth of field, lock to zoom, and then change the value to 500. Now we're going to go ahead and press OK. Now when you make the camera for the first time, you're not going to see anything until you turn on your 3D layers. So now let's turn on the 3D layers for our 3 layers. And let's just take a look at what we created. If we take a look in the custom view, remember custom view allows us to see from above what we're making in the world, right? Right now we have 3 images that are stacked on top of each other. This symbol here represents the camera. The camera is 500 pixels away and it's sitting right here. So cool. What I want to do is I want to separate these images so that I can play around with focus. So that's going to be our next step. We're going to move, and I'm on step number 5 in my notes if you're following along. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to the background image of the clouds, going to open that up, and I'm going to open up the transform settings. And since I have the 3D cube on, I can move this in 3 different dimensions, X, Y, and Z. So for the Z, I'm going to go ahead and put the background image pretty far away. So I'm going to type in 1000. And I'm going to move it very far away. And then for the middle ground, which is going to be the house, I'm going to open up transform. And I'm going to change the position here to 500, right? So they are far apart from each other. 1000 pixels away, 500 pixels away for the house, and then the dog, we just left it alone. Now let's switch our camera back to active camera so we can look at everything from the front. Now you'll notice when we did this, since the camera is closer to the dog looks really big. So we're going to modify the size of the clouds in the house now so that we have a better composition. So let's open up that background of the clouds. Let's go to scale and let's just bump it up. And it's okay if it goes beyond the screen a little bit. There we go. Let's open up the middle ground. Let's bump up that scale of the house. And then the dog's actually cool, but I might just want to bring him down a little bit. So you can use that green arrow to bring him down. Let's say he's out in front on the porch, or actually let's say he's out in front in the yard and he's far away from the house. That's going to be our idea, okay? So we have 3 layers. If you look at what I did in custom view number 1, you'll notice, yep, I just kind of stacked everything together, but everything is still separated, which is cool. So again, let's go to active camera. And let's remember what we did to our sizes, everybody. We moved our cloud 1000 pixels back in position. We moved our house 500. The dog, in terms of position, has not moved. It's at 0, okay? This is going to be important in a second because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use those values to control the camera. And let's figure that out. Let's open up the camera now. Now the camera is looking at this world, but if we adjust the settings of the camera, certain things will get in focus and out of focus. So I'm going to open up the camera options, And the most important one that'll really change the way the camera works is the aperture. So inside of camera, camera options, aperture. Go ahead and change that aperture. I'm going to bump it up big. I'm going to change it to 250. Okay, when you do that, you'll see that everything starts to get blurry except for the dog, because we are changing the aperture of the camera, and you can see that the world got blurry here except for the dog. The dog is sharp. So now you can experiment with keyframing aperture, and that will affect what gets blurry and what doesn't. And if you wanted to really think about what we did earlier, you could leave the aperture alone, but you could start playing around with the focus distance. So we know that we set our camera originally to have a focus distance of 500. So let's go back to custom view. That meant that from the camera, there was in 500 pixels, it would be in focus, which is the dog, right? That's why the dog looks nice and sharp. But what if I wanted to put the house in focus? Well, then I'd have to increase my focus distance by 500. So let's start doing some keyframing so we can see this happen. I'm going to keyframe my focus distance at 500 and leave it alone. I'm going to go up a couple frames. I'm going to go about 8 frames. And then now I'm going to change the focus distance to 1000. Okay? Now you'll see that the house is in focus because the camera changed its focus distance. If you look at this in custom view number 1, you'll see there's a small little square that's changing there. That represents what the camera is focusing on. The camera has not moved, but the focus distance has. Cool. Let's go back to active camera. So we had it at 500 pixels, the dog was sharp. We went to 1000, the house is sharp. Let's now go up a couple more frames, and now let's type in 1500, because then we'll go back into the clouds. Now the clouds are sharper, and you'll notice that the house got a little fuzzier. If you want to increase the fuzziness, you can increase the aperture. That will really exaggerate things more and more. You can see as I do that, everything gets blurrier. It's a little bit slow sometimes. Or you can increase the blur level too. The blur level will blur stuff out. So all this stuff you can experiment. Now, if you're having a lot of trouble on your computer, it's understandable. This actually takes a lot of power from your computer, especially if your computer is a little bit older. So if you're having a hard time with that, again, maybe just change the size of your screen to something smaller. But this is one of the basic things. And really, what the thing to remember was that we set up a camera, and then we set up a camera with a certain focus distance. We started with 500, and then we adjust the focus distance to get to the different elements and parts of our project, right? So you can see right now how things are getting blurrier and sharper. And that's really one of the basics. And just to remind you what we did is we made a camera, we increased the aperture, and then we played around with the focus distance. And what was very important, obviously, was that we separated the objects, right? Because we needed to do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't really see any cool things happening. So that, everybody, is the first option, Focus Basics. I obviously want you to experiment with that. What you would do in your own project is you would create layers, you would adjust the position of the layers, and then you would adjust the focus distance of the camera to affect that. All right, let's try another idea now. We're going to go down into our notes, and this is going to be called the 2-node camera, and it's also the link focus idea. So let's try that. So I'm going to make a new comp, and this one I'm going to call it link focus. Same settings as before. I'm going to press OK. Remember, I'm making a smaller video. And then now what we're going to do here, everybody, is even a little bit simpler. We're going to make a stroked shape. So I'm going to go to my shapes. I'm going to get an ellipse, no fill, with a stroke. Remember, you can click on the word fill and choose none. And you can click on the word stroke, and you're going to pick the second option, which is for color. And then you're going to pick a stroke color. So I'm going to hold down Shift and make a big circle. If I hold down Command, Option, and Home, it centers my center point, and then I'm going to center it on the canvas. For those of you who are on the PC, it's going to be, instead of Command, you'll do Control, Option, Home. Now, we've got our circle there, and that looks good. And then what I'm going to do is lock this layer, and I'm going to make a type layer, and I'm going to call this Focus. You can put any word you want there. And again, same settings, Command, Option, Home, center that, you go to Align, and center it on your canvas. So the idea here is that we want to make a different kind of camera. This is going to be a two-node camera. And two-node camera is a little bit different, and you'll see why. So we're going to go and right-click, New Camera. And this time we're going to change it to two-node camera. Same settings pretty much as before, though. We change the two-node, but then we go to Preset, and we do 50 millimeter, pixels again, enable depth of field, lock to zoom again. And then I'm going to keep playing with the 500 pixel zoom and focus distance because it makes life easier. So same settings as before, except we change the first thing to two-node. Two-node camera, pixels, horizontal, focus distance at 500, enable depth of field, lock to zoom. Cool. So now what we want to do is we want to see what happens as we adjust the settings here. And one of the things that we can do is we can actually do a little bit of a cheat. And this cheat is known as a link focus. And what that means is that the camera will stay in focus on an object. It's almost like the camera is smart and it will always stay in focus on whatever you choose. So in my case, I would like my camera to always stay in focus on the word focus. It'll always be sharp. So the trick to this, and right now everybody, I am on step 6. Okay, you're going to select both the camera layer and you're going to hold Shift and select your type layer. Both layers are selected. Hold Shift to select both. Now you're going to go up to the top of the screen, Layer, Camera, and you're going to go to Link Focus Distance to Layer. So that means the camera's focus distance is always going to be linked to wherever the layer is. Try it out. Let's see what happens. Oh, forgot to hit the 3D layer, everybody. Sorry about that. That's why I got that error message. Okay, let's do that again. Now select both of those layers. Sorry about that. Make sure the layers are set to 3D. Again, let's click on Focus, hold Shift, select on Camera 1, and then let's go back up to the top layer, Camera, Link Focus Distance to Layer. So now, here is where we get to have some fun with this. The camera is going to be basically linked to the layer that we decided in which we wanted it to stick to. In this case, it's the type layer. So now watch what happens. If I open up the transform settings for my type layer and I play around with the Z position, you'll see that when I go far away or when I come close, right? You might not notice anything happening yet, but if we go into the camera and we adjust the same setting that we did last time, remember the aperture, how important that was? That adjusted the blurriness. So if I adjust my aperture, I'm going to put it at 250. Now when I play around with the Z, you'll start seeing that that purple ring gets blurry because the camera is always going to be focusing on the words. So you can do some cool effects this way. So for example, I'll just show you. I'm going to animate some of this really quick by adjusting the position. So I'm going to make it really small because I'm pushing the Z-axis really far away. Let's type in a big number like 2000. And then let's bring it closer in a second. Let's bring it all the way up to 0. And now you're going to see that ring is going to get from soft to sharp. Now, why is that happening? That's happening because if we look at this in custom view number 1, the camera is keeping its focus on the layer. And this is one of the cool things that you can do with a two-node camera. The two-node camera can have two things that it's considering: the point of interest and then the camera itself. And obviously you can have a lot more fun with this. If we go back to active camera, if I bring those words negative, meaning closer to me, you'll notice that then that purple gets super blurry, right? Because now it's always keeping the words sharp, so the rest of the stuff gets blurry. So this would be a really cool thing for you to experiment with. And that is our second big idea, link focus. So now let's move on to our third idea, which is null control. So this will allow you to control your camera in a quick way. So let's make a new comp. Let's call this one null control. Same settings as before. And then in this one, let's do a simple thing again, where we're going to start with the same idea of a type layer and a shape layer. So I'm going to make another ellipse. This time let's make it green. Holding Shift, Command, Option, Home, align to center, and lock the layer, then grab your type tool. And this one I'm going to type null control. Control. Command, Option, Home. Put that thing in the center there, and obviously this is going to be make it a little smaller so we can see it. Command, Option, Home, and aligning this again to the center. I always like to align, and I like to align before I turn on the 3D tool, everybody, because once you start messing with 3D, it's hard to center stuff. Okay, so here's null control. That's our type layer, and this is our background layer. So what we want to do now is play around with this idea of controlling the camera with the null. So let's just do one little last step again, where we are going to push our shape to the back a little bit. So let's turn on the 3D layers, and then let's adjust the Z position of our green shape. So I'm going to push it back 500. Okay, so it's behind. If I go and look at this in active camera, yep, it's behind my words. I can make it a little bigger, so it kind of makes the composition a little bit nicer. That's cool. So what I did is I moved that green shape 500 in the Z so that it is behind the words. Now that I've done that, what I'm going to do is add the camera. So let's add a new camera. We can add a one-node camera this time. Same steps as before, 50mm, pixels, enable depth of field, zoom is at 500. Okay, now there's a camera there. You know, every time you make a camera, sometimes things move around on the screen and you want to adjust them. So, you know, for example, I might want to go back right now to my shape layer and increase the scale, because the camera changes the way things look. Okay, so far so good. We made a camera, we put it on top of everything. That's cool. Adjusted the shape of stuff. The new thing that we're going to do is the null control. So now let's make a new null object on top of everything. And then let's parent our camera to the null. Let's make sure we also turn on the 3D symbol for the null, and for our camera we will choose null1. This means that now the null will be the controller of the camera. And this is where you can also have some fun, because now if you open up your transform settings for the null, again, the null is now controlling the camera. This will kind of give you a little bit more freedom and power as you move the camera around. For example, if you do a rotation now, you'll see, and this is where it gets cool, you'll see that as the camera is rotating, you can really see the distortion that the camera is doing, because it's as if it was in a real space. Z rotation, not so exciting. X is pretty cool, because you can see as we spin around how you can tell that they are in separate locations, right? So you want to have some fun with this. Again, all of this is to experiment with everybody. I'm just giving you some basics right now, but this is how you get started, by experimenting with these different things. So again, the point here is the null is controlling the camera. So when you do rotations, for example, on the null, you're rotating the camera. If you want to look at this in custom view number 1, just so you can kind of see what's happening, you'll see that what's happening is the camera is moving based on what I'm adjusting with my null. And in all honesty, it's a lot easier to control your camera with a null than it is just by adjusting the camera settings. So that's why we do this, because it makes life a little bit easier. Okay, and that is your null control. Now the last step here, everybody, auto orient. We can actually start with what we had right now. I'm going to go back to active camera. What we do here is when we start with a setting like this, what we do is we tell the text layer that we want it to be always orienting towards the camera. And why do we want to do this? Well, let's go here. So I'm going to skip some of my notes because we already did the setup here. So I'm going to skip down to number 8. And when I go down to number 8, this is where you can adjust it. If you click on your text layer, and if you go up to right click, transform, auto orient. So again, on your text layer, right click, transform, auto orient. You can say orient towards camera. That means that this layer, the null control type layer, will always orient itself towards the camera. So what does that mean? Well, let's check it out. Now when I adjust my null settings and I adjust something like the Y rotation, if you remember last time we did the Y rotation, we saw the distortion and the space between them. Now when I move my Y rotation, my words won't move because they're stuck to auto orient. What does that look like from custom view number 1? Take a look. You see how the words get stuck with the camera because they are set on auto orient. So this is a cool setting because this allows you to keep that thing that you want always stuck to the front of the camera while everything else in the world moves around. And you can do this with the Z too. Again, Z not so exciting, but X is pretty exciting because now you'll see that ring move around. Now obviously it gets a little weird when we go too far, but a lot. We can do a lot with this. Okay, so that was auto orient, everybody. Now obviously if this was a little too fast for you, just go back, press stop, rewind the YouTube video, take your time, or lower the speed of the YouTube video and watch it slower.